Okay, hi, it's Julie back here for 50/50 Day, and we're so thrilled to have with us today June Cohen, who's the CEO and co-founder of the content incubator, Wait What? She served as the executive producer of TED Media and was instrumental in bringing TED online. And we're thrilled to have Reid Hoffman, who's a partner of the VC firm Greylock Partners and was the co-founder and executive chairman of LinkedIn. And together, June and Reid have a new podcast that launched last week on May 1st called Masters of Scale. And so we're thrilled to invite you both to participate in 50/50 Day.
Honored to be here. It's awesome.
So Masters of Scale, tell us a little bit about the podcast. And one thing that really struck me and us about it is that you have committed publicly to 50/50 gender balance bookings, which, you know, at 50/50 Day, we couldn't be more thrilled about. And so I'd love to have you guys talk about that for a minute.
June, you want to start or do you want me to?
Sure. Just one technical note, I'm hearing an echo and I'm not sure if we can fix that. Are you hearing it as well, Reid? I'll just jump right in regardless if you're not.
I'm not.
I'm hearing a little background noise. I don't know if it's an echo.
It was just.
We're going to look into that, but let's move forward anyway, if you're okay with that.
Okay. So, so let me start off. You know, Reid and I decided to jump into this audio series together, almost a year ago. And we made this decision. We wanted to launch this new podcast. It's called Masters of Scale. It just launched last week. The idea of it is to speak to anybody who wants to scale an idea or to scale a business. And when we looked at our first list of the people we'd love to have on the show, we realized we're like, oh gosh, this list they're all famous people, they're extraordinary, and they were like 80% white guys. And we looked at each other and we're like, no. And Reid, I actually remember it because I've had conversations like this many times in my career when you look at something and you're like, you know what, this isn't right. We should just make it balanced. And I pitched you this idea of like, maybe we should just do it 50/50. And to be honest, I actually expected a little bit of pushback, like a little bit of discomfort or a little bit of like, maybe not a percentage, but you were just like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, the short answer is you want a different world, you work to make it happen, right? And we normally would have actually just done this without any of this kind of publicity around 50/50, mostly because you're having 50/50 Day, that we're actually having this conversation and do this pledge to say, look, we think this is an important thing. And it was like, I don't know, our conversation was 5 seconds, right? It was like, yep, this is absolutely the right thing to do. It's the world that we should all be in, you know, that part of great talent is equally distributed across gender and many other variables as well, you know, and so let's make sure that we are doing the right thing in terms of the reflection of role models, content, learnings, expertise, you know, all of this really deeply matters. And so and June is the person, I actually wasn't even aware of 50/50 Day. June said, hey, there's this thing happening. We should move from our internal background dialogue to an external, you know, commit. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. Great.
So, but I think you bring up a really interesting point, which is it seemed like a no-brainer, but I do know, June, in some of our conversations that, you know, sometimes a no-brainer, like, well, we're just going to have 50/50 commitment to gender bookings for a show about scaling tech, it's actually a little bit of a challenge. And where the commitment to do this, you know, where the commitment kind of meets up with the challenge, right? Can you talk about that?
Sure. And Julie, again, I'm having the echo. So sort of talk about the challenge is what you want to do, whether there's a challenge in actually reaching.
Whether there's a challenge and why it's important to actually make a commitment to something to kind of be able to work through that challenge. And then Reid, maybe you can speak to why it's important to be public to help inspire other people, perhaps.
Totally. So there's two parts of the challenge. So what's interesting in the show is that there is zero challenge finding qualified, extraordinary people. We have a list of women we're dying to talk to. That's 100 people long. We can't fit them all into the series. We have 10 episodes. Each has one anchor guest. 5 are anchored by men, 5 by women. And then we have probably 40, 50 cameo appearances. And we keep adding more cameo appearances because there's so many people we want to tap. So zero problem finding people who are accomplished and articulate and extraordinary, including, honestly, a lot of women I've never heard of because they are extraordinary, but they get so little play. And I'll actually give you one example. Our guest today, we just launched episode 2. For everyone who's listening, I'd love for you to go to iTunes, go to Masters of Scale, give us some love and download, but mostly listen to the episode. It's this woman, Mariam Nafisi, incredible entrepreneur. She launched Eve.com in the 90s, Minted.com today. It's a 9-figure revenue company, 350 employees. I'd never heard of her before Reid put her forward for the show. So zero problem finding people. Here's where the challenge comes in. Men overall are more likely to put themselves forward to speak and to be guests. They tend to be better known. They tend to be more active on social media. And so whenever you're doing any list, your list of guests could very easily, very quickly fill up with very qualified men while the women are all back in their offices working. And so that's actually, for me, and we had the same kind of challenge we had at TED. If you look at who's right in front of you, your roster will very quickly fill with men. But that doesn't actually represent the balance of who's out there. And I'm going to hand to Reid to talk a little bit about kind of being upfront.
And the public commitment part of this is very straightforward, which is...
We need someone right now.
I think, are we good?
We're good. I think I seem to have dropped video on my end, but if you can see me, then we're good. I just can't see you.
I can see you.
Okay,
so,
great.
The public commitment, I think, is very straightforward, which is it's kind of a no-brainer that's where we in the world should be generally. We have kind of these lenient moments where it's kind of the question of, and Cheryl will be an anchor on a later episode, Sheryl Sandberg, where, kind of the question is to say, look, everyone should own this as leaders and say, this is where we should go. And so similarly, when June brought up okay, look, we're already operationalizing this, should we also make a public commitment? And, one of the things that always feels a little odd about making a public commitment is kind of like, did you have to work on it? Is it an affirmative action thing? You're kind of like, whoa, these are all signals we're not sending. And so why are you doing that? And we went, look, it's just so important that everyone go make sure, for exactly the reasons June was saying, is it's very easy. There's a whole bunch of men putting themselves forward. That's why these rosters can be unbalanced, right? Even though the nature of the world is actually balanced in this way, to make sure everyone makes that commitment in the right way. And so that was the reason to make the commitment publicly as well, even though we'd already been operationalizing it, and to highlight the importance of it, because obviously we still have a challenge.
So both of you, I'd love to talk to you about how are you implementing these values in other companies and in other projects that you're working on?
June, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
Reid, why don't you lead and I'll take it from there.
Okay, great. So broadly speaking, one of the things, obviously, I'm a Silicon Valley denizen. We obviously have a variety of gender and other kind of inclusion challenges here. The venture industry that I'm in is particularly extravagant on that. And so we do a variety of things. It's everything from doing investment in pipeline stuff, everything from various nonprofits and other things to try to make sure there's a broad range of talent working its way through the careers, to, for example, meeting entrepreneurs who, trying to facilitate the right kinds of growth in women entrepreneurs, and then hunting very assiduously for a kind of women partners. And, like, for example, like, I'm not really a sports guy, and now I know what the Rooney Rule is, because I'm like, okay, yes, let's implement that, right, in companies that we're tied to, in our firm itself, and everything else, as a way to make sure that you're heading towards the right kinds of balances. And those are the things, not just but also everyone here at Greylock does.
June, do you want to also chime in?
Yeah, so I'll chime in two ways. One is since as you know, I was at TED for 11 years. I was the executive producer. I've launched TED Talks and I co-produced the conference. And from that post, one of the things that was most important to me was building toward a balance of women on the stage. And it was something I just did quietly and sort of subversively in the background. I'll say something that to the three of us is very obvious. I would never invite token, I hate that term, women to the stage. I'd invite extraordinary women and extraordinary men and extraordinary people of color. And to try to create a world that appeared to have the balance that it actually has. And to me, that kind of representation is really important, just to create a visible world, as Reid was saying before, that matches the actual world that we live in. For a whole variety of reasons, we often have a world that appears, for example, to have far fewer women leaders than it does, because women leaders are just more reluctant for all kinds of different reasons to put themselves forward on stage. Internally, after leaving TED, in the last year, I've launched my own startup with my partner, Darren. Our collaboration with Reid is part of that. Masters of Scale is our first podcast. And we've committed as a media organization 100% to the notion of 50-50. So our team is 50-50 gender balance, as well as racially and ethnically balanced. We have a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, and a Jew. We have like 5 people. But also to have a 50-50 gender balance in our investors, to have a 50-50 gender balance in our executive team, and to have a 50-50 gender balance in each of our media properties, just because we think the world is better that way. We think better, we innovate more, we create things better and more happily when we are in balance as a team and as a company and as a world.
So you mentioned something actually really interesting. I want to just go back to something we said for a minute about this pipeline idea and, the kind of bottom up, seeing people, and then top down, making a commitment institutionally, right? And how, and what is that, where do you see that tipping point per se, or how can that be, how can it be more institutionalized or more recognized when you're talking about scale, right? Your podcast is Masters of Scale. So I guess the question is, how do we scale up gender equity? I mean, the numbers still are not where we'd like them to be.
Well, one of the things I've seen a bunch of tech companies doing that I think is the kind of thing that leads to the right progress curve is publishing numbers, and publishing numbers on a yearly, quarterly, et cetera basis, so you can track progress. Because once you have metrics, you can begin to operationalize to those metrics. And I think that was a very good thing that, LinkedIn does it, a number of companies here do it, in order to say, look, this is an important thing and we're going to get there and we're going to manage to it. It's like, manage to objectives, objectives and key results and so forth. And that I think then highlights the importance of it. And then I think the question within the kind of the scale, the Masters Scale thread is usually about like, how do you start with something that is, kind of a startup and then go to building something that's really big, and what's that whole scale journey? Because that scale journey is part of what makes one of the core interesting secrets of Silicon Valley that's well under discussed, which is why Silicon Valley continues to produce interesting companies. And then essentially you want more women as founders, as executives, and so forth, as part of that talent pool, doing that. But we do have a number, and some of them are on, this season's Masters of Scale, and we have a long list, as June suggested, as to having more. There's a bunch of people we're like, we can't get to them this season. Hopefully we can get to them in the future. Anyway, so that's a first reflex to it.
So June, you are a media innovator. How can we use media innovation in ways that will promote gender equity? This is one, this kind of back channel commitment. What are some other things that you have in the pipeline that you're thinking about?
Well, I think that across the board, the biggest answer in many ways when it comes to the 50-50 gender balance is simply a decision. And that, to me, that actually applies not just only to something like this, which is a nonfiction kind of documentary style. Essentially, it's not a talk show, but we have guests, right? And anytime you have that, then you just can make a decision around a 50-50 balance. But I think it also applies across narrative. Shonda Rhimes has done incredible work there in terms of both gender balance and ethnic and diversity balance. I also think there's other kinds of balance and diversity that we need to talk to, right, particularly in the US. I think that our media does not represent the linguistic variety of this country. If you have a Southern accent, if you have a Western accent, if you have a Midwestern accent, you don't hear yourself on TV, as well as if you have a Spanish accent or an African-American dialect, you don't hear yourself. And I actually think there's subtle kinds of diversity like that that really matter in media today, along with gender diversity.
I never really thought about that. That's a really interesting, unique point. That's a new light bulb.
Yeah, so, it's a post-election light bulb.
Yeah, exactly.
We all had many of them.
So Reid, I will say, I would love to hear from you. Why do you think that gender equity is important for men?
Well, let me start from the very top, that gender equity is important for the world, right? And what's important for the world is also important for men. There is amazing creativity, innovation, dispersal of talents and everything else, which amplifies productivity for the overall world. And I take that point as so obvious, I'm not going to elaborate it, but if anyone doesn't think it's obvious, I'm happy to elaborate it. And then when you say, why isn't men, is actually, in fact, part of what you want for nimbleness, agility, kind of creating the future is you want counterpoints and diversity of perspective. And I actually think that part of the thing that I personally, but also I think all men can learn from is like, okay, what are counterpoints in kind of like how to think about solving this problem? What are possible solutions? What are ways that we can organize and make things work and happen together? What are futures that we should actually be working towards? There's a lot of discussion within Silicon Valley that essentially missionary versus mercenary cultures are actually much better, that have values and virtues for what kind of companies and world you're building. Well, what are those values and what our culture? Actually, diversity of voices is very helpful. And that makes you stronger, not only benefit the world, but makes you a stronger operator as a man to functioning in those environments, to be having those colleagues, collaborators, partners in doing the work. And I think that's super important. And that's definitely been my experience personally.
I've always loved that term, missionary versus mercenary culture. I think that should be a headline somewhere, like in stone in Silicon Valley. We're actually going to be bringing some, I think we might be bringing 50-50 Day to to the Naval War College, which, that's a great place to bring that conversation as well. So looking forward, both of you, we're 50 years out, we're looking 50 years into the future. What do you think some other practical things we can do to get to this world we want to see?
And the question, Julie, being what practical thing could we?
What practical thing do you think, like the thing that we should just key into as we're wrapping up?
Well, there's two things I'd like to add. One is that I was actually quite shocked that Masters of Scale is the first American media program to commit to a 50-50 gender balance. I was floored by that. We did multiple rounds of research to confirm that it was actually true. I think there's all kinds of reasons that happens. I do know that, of course, there are many American media programs who strive for balance. One of the things I'm proud of and I find interesting in Masters of Scale is that we have quietly in the background made this originally quietly, now more loudly, decided for this 50-50 gender balance. But the show is not about gender at all in any way. And in fact, we are probably the only business program to never talk, and we don't ask Sheryl Sandberg about being a woman. We don't ask any woman on the show about being a woman, about feminine leadership. Those are interesting topics. I actually love them. But that's not what the show is about. We actually talk to them about the work they do, the management decisions they make, how they manage to grow a company. And that's actually what makes it fascinating and truly equal. And so to me, that's part of what the future is about, just being quietly 50-50, where gender sits in the background.
And by the way, just a note on that's something I love is at least a glimmer or a signpost of progress in Silicon Valley is that now generally amongst many VCs and everything else, people will be talking to founders saying, you need to get your Sheryl Sandberg. And they're not talking, you need to get a woman COO. They're saying, you need to get a COO of this level caliber of talent who's working with you in order to make this happen. And it just happens to be, she's the example, right? And it's just awesome in its impact for just like going, ooh, got to think about this. Because it's not a gender topic. It's a scale topic as a way of happening. And if I would look at the future, I think I would say, look, I think that the future is inevitably 50-50. I think that truth and progress will get us there. And I think the thing that's great about what you guys are doing, and the reason why it's important for people to kind of pay attention, sign on, that sort of thing, is that get there faster, right? And so, that was, again, part of the reason why when we went, well, we're already doing this. And even though we don't want to seem like we're doing it just to make a kind of a point, because we think the world is already justly this way, the reason why we said, look, we'll sign on to this is because we said, okay, let's help everyone pay attention to it and work to be there faster.
Tiffany,
I've been wanting to going, woohoo! Yes, it takes bold leaders like both of you to take that stuff so that others can follow and be mindful and accountable. And I love everything you're doing. I love your podcast. I got to listen to the first episode, so keep on doing what you're doing. This was a great addition to this global day about getting to 50-50. And thank you, Julie from LA. We're starting another session soon, but just wanted to say, and Reid, it's been a long time since I've actually seen you and talked to you since the Webby Awards. I think I remember calling you and asking you for advice when I wanted to sell it. Thank you for that. And I just, again, wanted to thank all three of you for a great, great conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Bye.